What has happened, everybody? James Hancock here, back to review the season finale of Season 1 of The Orville, an episode called Mad Idolatry. I almost didn't do this review because I'm so late, but I have a really good excuse. I was out getting wasted last night. Went to this event in New York called Kevin Geeks Out. It's this absolutely fantastic variety show here in New York with a bunch of movie clips and commentators and that sort of thing, and the after party is always a lot of fun. And as all of us know, this was originally not supposed to be the season finale. The season finale, episode 13, got pushed to season 2, and so this kind of feels like a non-event or an inconsequential finale. It does have a bit of a curveball at the end that kind of leads us into season 2, but I would be lying if I didn't admit that this episode felt a little inconsequential compared to some of the great episodes we've seen throughout this season. I mean, now that we've seen first season as a whole and we know that season 2 is on its way, we can start trying to figure out what are the high watermarks of Seth MacFarlane's new creation. And I'm looking at a list of all the episodes right now, and I'd have to say that for me, it's got to be right around 6, 7, and 9. The episode 6 was one called Krill, where Ed and Gordon were on the Krill ship, which I think just for pure laughter and overall joy, that episode was absolutely hysterical. Episode 7, Majority Rule, I think gets a lot of points because of its superb social satire. I know a lot of people have rightfully pointed out that it borrows pretty heavily from season 3, episode 1 of Black Mirror. Nonetheless, I thought Majority Rule is absolutely fantastic. And then we had episode 9, Cupid's Dagger, the one when Rob Lowe came back and he basically made everybody who touched him or smelled him want to go to bed together. And I feel like that one was pretty hilarious as well, and also really pushed the narrative of Kelly and Mercer forward, which brings us to episode 12, which does a pretty fair job of bringing the relationship forward, but brings them finally to a place where Kelly has to reluctantly admit that perhaps it's not the best idea for her to work with Ed, because when Ed decides to cover for her for breaking one of their major rules about interacting with primitive societies, it sets in motion a lot of unintended consequences. So at the core of Star Trek and now the Orville has always been the Prime Directive, basically do not interfere with the internal development of alien civilizations, at least until they've developed the ability to explore space on their own. But there haven't necessarily been a lot of great episodes or movies that deal with the consequences of failing to adhere to the Prime Directive. So we have a situation in this episode where they find a planet where once every 11 days it basically appears in this one particular sun, but the rest of the time it's off in its own universe where time proceeds at a very different rate. So basically 11 days and the equivalent of our universe is 700 years in theirs. The crew of the Orville encounters them when they're still in a relatively primitive state, and Kelly, in a very innocent way, decides to heal a young girl who's hurt before they skedaddle. And Ed decides to cover it up because he figures no harm, no foul. But when they see that civilization 700 years later, they realize that a religion is formed around Kelly, and that Kelly is basically worshipped as a god, but a very tyrannical, cruel god in a lot of ways. I mean, if you're a thief or a crook, they'll do things like slash you open and hang you, and if you're innocent, Kelly will miraculously heal you, which obviously will never happen. So everybody's guilty, etc. and so forth. It's basically the dark side of like our own Spanish Inquisition. And Kelly obviously is very morally conflicted by this. On one hand, she doesn't want thousands, if not millions of people to suffer in her name. However, the Prime Directive definitely dictates that they cannot interfere with this civilization until they develop their own technology. Eventually they say, screw it. Kelly reveals herself, tries to convince them otherwise, and it's not meant to be. The person who does believe her ends up just getting assassinated, and their civilization proceeds as normal. But what's interesting is that Isaac, who his lifespan basically lasts millions and millions of years, he decides that he can go down during one of their cycles, because 700 years for him is like 700 seconds for us, and that he can try and undo the damage, and that way Kelly doesn't have to sacrifice herself in order to undo all the harm they've accidentally caused. But as it turns out, this sort of obsessive, very almost like borderline hysterical, violent religion just turns out to be a natural part of their society's development. And by the time they meet up with Isaac again, the civilization has actually evolved out of this religion just organically on their own, and that they actually adjusted to Isaac very, very quickly, and that this society will now start to develop at such a rate that they're probably going to leave the society of the Orville behind very, very quickly. So overall, it was a very cool, kind of traditional Star Trek Next Generation concept. I guess for me, I was only let down a little bit because this is the season finale and we're going to have to wait for another year. So I was really hoping for just a complete home run. I mean, this episode did have maybe the biggest laugh I've had through the entire season, and maybe it's just because I was wasted when I was watching it, But at one point, Mercer's playing this game with Bortus and his mate, and they're throwing this little ball around, and it seems totally ridiculous, basically hot potato, but it seems pretty boring and pretty easy. And Ed finally's like, is this all there is to the game? And all of a sudden, this giant spike goes through his hand, and Bortus is like, ah! They all crack up, and for whatever reason, I feel like that just got down to the root of his species humor, and I just howled. So I absolutely love that. And there's some nice scenes where we see Ed and Kelly falling back in love, and how he does his little trick where he makes peanut butter and jelly, but he keeps the peanut butter and jelly in 2 separate sandwiches, so they'll have to kiss in order to combine the flavors. Perhaps it was a little overly sugary, but this is TV, and so it was nice to see them getting back together. I feel like their relationship has basically been the one through line throughout this entire first season. But when she decides she needs to do the responsible thing and no longer work with him, it was sad. I just didn't feel like it was like a giant season 1 cliffhanger. I mean, one of the all-time great season cliffhangers has to be Star Trek Next Generation Season 3, where you see Picard has been turned into one of the Borg. I mean, that's how you wrap up a season and feed into the next. In any case, I've absolutely loved the Orville. It's had its ups, it's had its downs. It was definitely interesting initially in the fall, seeing how the critics hated it, but the audiences loved it. And it's been a lot of fun watching it compete with Star Trek. I think most people now are willing to concede that when it comes to just pure fun and enjoyment, the Orville has won this contest in the short term. But Star Trek comes back in January, so we'll see what they're able to accomplish in the absence of Orville when they're no longer competing side by side. But in the absence of the Orville, I feel like there is one thing that we can still look forward to between now and next fall. Black Mirror comes out in a couple weeks, season 4, and there's an episode called the U.S.S. Callister. And the trailer that I saw makes it look like a very fun satire of a Star Trek episode. And who knows? I mean, Black Mirror tends to be a little dark, so it'll probably have some teeth. But it's an interesting world that we live in where other people who don't work for Star Trek seem to have a better grasp of what Star Trek should be than Star Trek Discovery. I do enjoy Star Trek Discovery, but when I saw like a week ago that Quentin Tarantino had pitched to J.J. Abrams an idea for a Star Trek movie, and that they're already assembling a writer's room to try to put together a screenplay, I mean, that is really exciting stuff. If you go on YouTube, you can find this long conversation that Quentin Tarantino had with Chris Hardwick from The Nerdist, where he talks about some of his favorite episodes of Star Trek and why those particular episodes work. And for a guy who's never done really any science fiction in his movies, it was interesting to see just how passionate Tarantino is about the world of Star Trek and what makes it tick. So if Tarantino were to sidestep into the world of Star Trek for his 10th movie, I'd watch it. I'd probably watch it a lot. And so I just hope that CBS and Star Trek is able to keep up with Black Mirror and Tarantino and Seth MacFarlane, all these people who I feel like are making shows and movies in the best tradition of Star Trek, even if they don't have the official CBS Star Trek logo emblazoned above it. In any case, I've had an absolute blast following this first season. I'll definitely be back next fall to review season 2. But if you guys have enjoyed my Orville reviews, don't hesitate to give me some suggestions for more sci-fi shows to review between now and next year. Obviously, Westworld season 2 will be a major event. I'm looking forward to The Expanse season 3. I feel like it's a good time to be a sci-fi fan, and the Orville fits in very nicely in this new landscape, bringing a lot of laughter to a genre where sometimes laughter can be painfully absent. But thank you so much for watching this review. Please consider giving my channel a subscribe. Give me a shout on Twitter at Colbrax if you want to talk more, or just leave a comment in the comments below. But I hope everyone has an amazing weekend, and I'll talk to y'all soon.